Hello. So, continuing with my explanation of the phonology of our gripping language. If you haven't seen the first video yet, please do so. So to iterate through all the stuff that you can do with the fingers, we have, so this is the natural dominant. So this is an on-dom off sub position. That makes a difference. You have knuckle, gap, knuckle, gap, knuckle, gap, knuckle, gap. That's 8 places of articulation. And you also have what we're calling a jump, which is instead of just a plain press, like for example with my third finger, you can either do a plain press on the knuckle or a plain press on the gap. You can't really see the plain press on the gap unless you're really close. Like that. You can see it a little bit. But it's very, very tactily audible, I assure you. But you also can do a lift press, which can be pretty small. Doesn't need to be big. And the reason for that is that it's actually possible to sense, although not very strongly, but enough when it's in close succession, it's possible to sense the actual lifting motion because there's a slight suction sensation. There's a slight stickiness that you can feel if you try it. So what we have is, for the fingers, 4 places of articulation, roughly speaking, multiplied by 2 variants, whether knuckle or gap, or whether lower or on, I'll explain that in a sec, multiplied by 2 types of press, namely just plain press or lift and press, which is calling a hop. One issue with coding this, so we already decided, for reasons I mentioned in the previous video that we want to code it in terms of the recipient, or sorry, in terms of the sender. Because if you code it in terms of the recipient, then you limit the phonology significantly. One problem, however, is do you code this as, for example, fifth sender, sender fifth pressing a knuckle, sender fifth pressing a gap, or do you code this as sender fifth pressing the lower of the two versus sender fifth pressing the higher of the two? That is comfortable. My inclination is to code this in terms of gap versus knuckle, but this is going to be an issue of what is easy for the recipient to do, because it's going to require a little psychological mapping, and we're not quite sure yet which one is going to be easier to do. So that's everything that the fingers can do. We considered doing certain other phonemes, like for example, a press in the gap. Like here with my third finger, you can press on the regular gap. You could press sort of here on the gap, which is not very far in, and then all the way back in the gap. And we just found those to be very awkward to do and RSI inducing. And we want this to be fairly easy. Another thing what we considered is rubs, for example, like that or that or that. And those also we just found to be very awkward and somewhat painful to do. So we don't have those. So further, what you have is the thumb. The thumb alone, for the DOM at least, actually makes up a large portion of the phonemes. So what you have for DOM thumb in natural position is tip, tip knuckle, base phalanx. So these bones are called phalanxes or phalanges. Sorry. Base knuckle, metacarpal, center, and wrist down here. So those are 5 places of articulation for the DOM thumb to activate. And then you have 3 points between which it can do rubs. So the tip, the base phalanx, and the metacarpal, you can go like that, like that, that, etc. You can do basically rubs, so that's 6 rubs, one or 4 rubs. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then continuation versions of those. You can do the bottom 2 with your nail also. So instead of pressing like that, you can press like that with the nail, that with the nail versus that. Those are actually very distinguishable, but they're moderately awkward to do, so I'm not sure if those are going to survive. And you could do rubs with the nail. You could also do the thing I mentioned in the last video of hops. So, for example, you could do just a press, or you could do a lift press, press or lift press. And there may be a phonotactic constraint that you have to, if you're going to do a lift press, you have to happen to be already in that position. For the other fingers, that constraint already exists, but it's trivial because if you're pressing something, you're already in that position. Or off by a trivial amount, namely knuckle versus gap. Versus if you want to do a lift press on the thumb tip and you happen to start from here, you could do something like that, but then that's confusable with just being here and then doing a thumb tip press. So that is probably going to be a phonotactic issue. What else is there? There's blah, 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 blah. I think that's most of them. So these are the basic phonemes in the language. And we haven't yet gotten into what co-articulations we may have. So, for example, you may press the gap and third together, so like that. I'm doing this really big. You wouldn't, in actual practice, it just looks like that. And you can't really tell. And so on. We haven't really figured out what we're going to do with that yet. Things that we decided not to do are this sort of a slap, because it was too awkward and it made a lot of noise on the fingers. Using the torsions intentionally as phonemes, we decided that was also awkward. Difference of intensity, so pressing hard versus pressing soft. Right now we find that that's too difficult to distinguish for the receiver, but my feeling is that this may come back later when we're both better at distinguishing things. Another thing that was pretty big that we considered hard before dropping was thumb disposition. So if you consider this as sort of the default, you could also go like that, which I called the subdominant position, because this is actually my subhand, which is on top now. Or you could go like that, so 2 fingers of the dom hand are on the sub thumb. We considered it and rejected it mainly because if you're in one of the non-standard positions for thumb disposition, the phonology of either or both the dom or the sub hand is actually severely reduced, and we didn't want to have that happen. So I think that covers most of it. Let's see if there's anything that I missed. That's about it. So that's the phonology of our gripping language. If you have any comments, I'm sure we'd be glad to hear them. Hopefully that was clear. If something wasn't, please ask, and I'll either explain it by text or, if necessary, I'll make a video to show exactly what I was trying to do. Anyway, fiat lingua.